We are now going to provide space for what will be our first panel discussion. Your moderator will be Cyrus Marcus Ware, and Cyrus is an assistant professor of the School of Arts at McMaster University. He's a Vanier scholar, visual artist, activist, curator, and educator, and Cyrus is also one of our program associates with SUPAMO. It's been a pleasure to be with Cyrus in so many spaces and in so many ways, because the depth of knowledge and also the empathy at which he leads his activism is just absolutely amazing. The panel will be addressing harassment, discrimination, and the erasure of Black arts presence. It will also feature speakers, Robert Ball, Marcel Stewart, and Charmaine Headley, who will be arriving a little bit later because she's also finishing a class that ends at 11 o'clock. Without further ado, I welcome Cyrus Marcus Ware.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the chance to gather with you today. And a huge thanks to SMAPO for organizing today. Thank you, Diane, for those words that have just set us off on such an imaginative journey to begin our day. So my name is Cyrus. I'm coming to you from Toronto, from the part of Toronto that was underwater at the time of the Toronto Purchase, and is therefore unceded territory, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As Charles mentioned, this is Three Fires territory and the territory of the Just With One Spoon Wampum. It's an honor to come to you from these territories. So today we're going to be speaking in this first panel about this idea of what has happened in the field. So thinking through the ways that harassment, discrimination, and processes of erasure have impacted on Black arts presence here in this north part of Turtle Island and Inuit Nunavut, and what has happened as a result. We, as artists, bring our histories with us into these spaces, and yet we often find ourselves shut out of the very opportunities that would allow for engagement, career advancement, critical contexts with our work. We have some amazing folks on this panel who are going to lead us through a little bit of a journey exploring this topic, and then we're going to get into some questions and discussion. First of all, we have the incredible Robert Ball. Born in Toronto, Robert Ball attended Claude Watson Art Program and later studied part-time at Humber College. Robert has traveled and performed in over 60 countries and has been a featured vocalist and headliner with Royal Caribbean International. Robert is a versatile singer and songwriter with a soulful voice and jazz sensibilities. He has been a part of various musical theater readings and workshops, working with Tony winner Lilas White, and Oscar and Grammy nominee Carol Woods. Robert's work is extensive, and he has a tremendous amount of credits to his name. I encourage you to check out his website, robertballmusic.com, for full information. We're also going to be speaking with Charmaine Headley, co-founding artistic director of COBA, Collective of Black Artists. Charmaine is a champion of Africanist dance. Through her work as an artist, choreographer, and teacher, she advocates for the recognition and inclusion of the contributions of ethnocultural dance practices in the Canadian dance history and culture. Charmaine pushes for a broadened societal appreciation of these art forms and advocates for reflexivity within curricula. Charmaine is also a mother, so shout out to all the parents out there who are making this magic happen while also taking care of our next generation of artists and activists. Marcel Stewart is going to round out the panel, bringing in voices and words. Marcel says that they are their ancestors' wildest dreams. An actor, writer, dope MC, arts educator, and organizer who loves vacuuming the house while listening to the soundtrack of Waiting to Exhale. Marcel is a Black man of Jamaican heritage, born in the UK but raised in Canada. He is a product of colonialism and is actively working every day to decolonize himself. He feels that it is his responsibility as a Black artist to carry those who have come before by affirming our contemporary stories, emotions, and ideas through art. I'm so excited for this panel and for this discussion and getting into some of the questions after the panelists. But first, let us start and by hearing each of these folks tell us a little bit about their journey and their story. And Robert, perhaps we can start with you. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. I'm really excited to be here and to be part of this conversation. I love to be able to see people, so I'm going to try to go to Grid and see at least as many names and people as possible. So my journey, born and raised in Canada, I now often say that I'm a true reflection of the diaspora in Canada. My mother's from Jamaica. My father, I'm 6 generations Canadian on my father's side. Prior to that, slavery in the US. That's something that I was taught. I was raised knowing that my great-great-great-grandfather came to the Underground Railroad to Canada for opportunities and for a better life for us. I started at performing arts school at age 9. I started gigging professionally at 18. That was probably years ago. And, you know, through that journey, there's been a lot that I've had to navigate. Being, as I said, a reflection of the diaspora in Canada, I've always had to kind of qualify my Blackness in this space, my ancestry in this space, because the reality is that the majority of Black Canadians are they themselves immigrants, 1st or 2nd generation. And so I always get, oh, where are you from? And I say, well, you know, Canada. They say, where are your parents from? I say, my mother's from Jamaica. And then my father's from Canada. Oh, he's white. Well, no. And that's something that I've always had to navigate. And that is important to me to talk about because that also talks about the erasure of my ancestry here, not just in terms of their bodies being here, but as it pertains to this conversation in the arts. My great-great-grandfather was a minister, and him and his wife, kids, and grandchildren traveled around Canada and the US as the Ball Family Jubilee Singers. And there were articles written about them. He was an advocate for the Black community. He wrote open letters to newspapers. There was a write-up on what I forget what it was called at the time, but what is now the Toronto Star, called 4 Generations of Music Legacy, something to that effect, which a picture of him, my great-greats. But that's something that has been erased from the greater conversation in Canada, erased from the landscape of arts conversations in Canada. And so I'm really excited to be part of this panel and having these conversations.
Thank you so much for taking us on that journey. I'm going to invite Marcel to take us on another little bit of a journey before we get into some discussion.
There I was, laying in bed on a Friday morning in May, my mind wandering down the yellow brick road of possible outcomes of what the day could be. I had a performance that night, the second last show of The Brothers Size, so I knew that my day would eventually end up at the Young Center for the Performing Arts. For those who don't know, The Brothers Size was a production at Soul Pepper Theater in 2019, was written by the gifted Terrell Alvin McCraney, and directed by the ingenious Mumbi Tindembwa Otu. Outside of that night's performance, the possibilities for the day seemed endless. And then my sister from England called me around 9:30 a.m. Yo, man, I don't know how to tell you this, but Martin is dead. Martin, the eldest cousin on my mother's side, was like a brother to me. And not that we were particularly close or had a tight relationship, but for as long as I can remember, he was an example to me of what Black manhood was. He was stylish, strong, complicated, imperfect, unapologetic, nuanced. An artist in his own right, Martin went by Surplus, a legend in underground UK hip hop. At a very young age, Martin had been performing professionally, while the concept of doing that was still a pipe dream for me. He brought me to the studio with him. He took me out to meet other artists in the UK. We wrote rhymes together. He truly was one of my first artistic inspirations. All of that and then some rushed through my mind when my sister told me that he had taken his life. I knew he was hot-tempered. I knew he had aggression issues. I knew he often isolated himself from the rest of the family, but that was just Martin. It never dawned on me that there was more going on beneath the surface. Mental health in the Black community does not get talked about enough, particularly with regards to Black masculinity and particularly with regards to Caribbean Black men. There is a lot of intergenerational trauma, toxic masculine trauma, institutional trauma that Black men just carry with them daily. And unfortunately, that leads to abusing and misusing women, queer people, trans people, fear of being vulnerable, hypermasculinity. The list goes on and on. After getting off the phone with my sister, I went outside, walked around the neighborhood, found a park bench to sit on, and I bawled my face out. When I got to the theater that night, I told my castmates what was up. One of my castmates instantly dropped the book he was reading, broke down, and gave me a huge hug. What a sight that must have been. Two Black men bawling in each other's arms over the loss, a premature loss, of another Black man. My castmates assured me they had my back that night, and we went out there and gave that audience an experience. It wasn't until after the show, when I was in the dressing room getting out of costume, that I felt so grateful in that moment to be working on a play that explored the very thing I had been processing all day. What does it mean to be a Black man? And why is the concept of existing so difficult and challenging for so many of us? And it wasn't just that The Brother Size was about the Black male experience. It was also that 80% of the cast and crew for that production were also Black. The director, the assistant director, the movement coordinator, the sound designer, the costume designer, the dialect coach, even the artistic director of the theater company was Black. Like, this production was Black. The ancestors were with us the whole way. And that's why Black art's presence in the arts milieu is so important to me. Like, it's not just about storytelling. It's about embracing leadership as a storyteller. It's about collective healing, ancestral healing, self-recovery, decolonizing our bodies, minds, and spirits. It's about loving ourselves. It's about loving each other. It's about creating new systems of emancipation and tearing down oppressive frameworks. There is no one Black experience. We are not a monolith. We come from all over the world. We're different genders, different shades, different sexualities, different cultural backgrounds, all within the global Black community. There are still so many stories to be told, which is why erasure must stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much for leaving us with that powerful idea of why it is so essential that this ends. Charmaine has joined us, and I'm so thankful for a chance to introduce Charmaine Headley. Charmaine, we've read your bio already, so if you're ready, we would love to turn over to you to offer your thoughts on this particular panel, exploring again erasure and displacement within the arts. So I'll hand it over to Charmaine if you're ready.
Thank you for inviting me and having me part of this panel. This is something that we need to continue talking and addressing. So my entry into this is around othering. Othering is the number one contributing factor to inequitable practices and subsequent erasure of Black arts presence in Canada. During these times of COVID, when our lives have been placed on pause, the impact on art workers, artists, technicians is intensified because our livelihood is connected public gatherings, theater, event galleries, etc. Activities that thrive based on public exposure. Layering on the intersection of race and Black artists, we're involuntarily thrust into trauma, coming face to face with the violence of our new and our now ancestor, George Floyd, who was brutally murdered in front of the world in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by police officer Derek Chauvin, and with the overwhelming reaction of a world with time on their hands to finally see what has been a glaring reality for Black bodies. Our minds and spirits since this has been continuous throughout our lives, and we know as a reality as Black people. Violence on and against Black bodies is not a secret to many of us here. Our histories have bear witness with this, and in the present day, we feel the reality that although 400 plus years have passed, the attempts at dehumanization continue as we are defiled, discriminated against, and displaced because of the color of our skin. The relative shock of the rest of the planet at this reality that has been embedded in society for hundreds of years was exposed for all to see, which was traumatizing in and of itself, in part due to the pandemic. For this, let us honor the life of George Floyd and give thanks, recognizing that the ultimate sacrifice of his inhumane death brought meaning to our lives and put a face to our silent daily traumas. Back to othering. In the funding system today, there are priority groups for specific demographics. Deaf and disability artists, the LGBTQ plus two-spirited community, and the Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC. Though the acronym is widely used and embraced as a sign of progress, it is an inadequate way to describe multiple identities, voices, stories, and experiences of those that it purports to represent. It simply lumps several ethnicities together neatly and arrogantly as others. While we welcome the recognition from funding bodies that the lump of groups share similar experiences of ongoing systemic inequities within society, this is not a solution. It's not inclusive, and it is a Band-Aid effect, equivalent to using a Band-Aid to close up a patient after open heart surgery. This may be hugely dramatic, but I believe it demonstrates the severity of where we are positioned. According to Bell Hooks, marginalized groups deemed other who have been ignored, rendered invisible, can be seduced by the emphasis on otherness, by its commodification, because it offers the promise of recognition and reconciliation. When the dominant culture demands that the other be offered as a sign that progressive political change is taking place, that the American dream can indeed be inclusive of difference, it invites a resurgence of essentialist cultural nationalism. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole to deconstruct essentialism or assuage difference. My point is, having designated us as priority groups offer a shallow redemption to those who succeed, but does not fully dismantle the fundamental core issue facing our society, which is the practice of historical and present-day systemic anti-Black racism. The chosen artist or arts organization within the priority groups is dependent on who sits at the jurors' table. If successful in receiving funding, they may create a false impression of progress that obscures the core issue and perpetuates the status quo. These tidbits thrown to the starving masses are not flattening the curve of anti-Black racism. No, the work has just begun. Dismantling the system and rebuilding one that is inclusive is the only way to eradicate the existing practices that either silence and or erase our art, thereby erasing us. We cannot afford to celebrate and be flattered by the spurts of funding we have been conditioned to accept gratefully as though they represent progress. They serve to hide an uncomfortable truth about the imbalance of wealth on which the current system is built, an imbalance that is reflected by the disparities in funding between the other BIPOC artists and mainstream purveyors. The Constitution in the US and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada is a decree of right for society, written during the time of mass enslavement, rape, and genocide of African and indigenous North American bodies. These atrocities were ignored because the authors thought the enslaved and indigenous people of the indigenous people to be subhuman. The new laws of today promote equity and give rights to the underprivileged, yet fail to honestly address and dismantle the practices which are systemically endorsed by the letter of the law, the Constitution. The system remains. Arts practice must be integrated into the educational system, and both must reflect the truth of our existence together with other forms of life in this universe, from primary school through to tertiary level education. We must not allow this practice of othering to continue. We must stop the wheel of existential exoticism of our culture from spinning. African and indigenous history must be integrated into the curricula so that the lens used to view excellence and to assess the arts and to determine the standard of education will be inclusive. In a conversation with my son a couple of weeks ago, he used the term equality. I was not familiar with that word, so I did a little research and discovered that it is an anglicized representation of the French word égalité, a philosophy about social, political, and economical equality. It means a state of being essentially equal or equivalent, equally balanced. I learned that this is the motto of France, written into the 1958 Constitution, and now part of its heritage. Liberté, sorry, I'm not a French person. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, which translates to liberty, equality, and fraternity. I was drawn to the last part of that definition, equally balanced, and it generated multiple questions. How do we create a society that respects all races equally? How do we ensure that inequities are removed within a society that is built on the erasure of other cultures? How do we remove the barriers that we face daily, hindering our existence? How do we change the unconscious sense of privilege that pervades conversations? How do we unmute ourselves? How do we achieve this? I reflected on a very colorful analogy used by one of my friends. She said it is like having a root canal done with a toothpick. There is much work to be done. We have to find a way of moving from philosophies of equity to real, tangible equity. This requires active ways of ensuring that our voices are recognized as part of the fabric of society, not silenced or subordinated others on the fringes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. And a huge thank you to Robert, Charmaine, Marcel, for taking us on this initial journey. So I would love to just jump into some questions and talk to you all about just what is happening right now. So of course, you've all spoken to this experience of erasure in this particular way. And of course, I don't know if any of you have read Susan Cain's book, Mounting Frustrations, the Art Museum Black Power, but in that she talks about how often when they're in these moments of civil unrest where anti-Blackness is being discussed in the zeitgeist, that arts organizations, maybe I'll use the word condescend to take up our work, but usually only in limited ways. So she's talking about visual arts, and she talks about how Black artists are offered a temporary exhibition, often in a kitchen gallery off the restaurant, that doesn't actually, turn into being acquisition into the collection or planned for a major exhibition. And of course, you could extrapolate that to music, to dance, to theater, all of the ways that we get offered these small crumbs rather than systemic change. And then, of course, we saw this summer this dramatic increase in these gestures of solidarity in the form of the solidarity statement. So everyone in June, everyone and their brother was putting out an I support Black Lives Matter or I support Black artists statement. And I think now that we're into December, the receipts are coming due, and a lot of people are saying, well, what was the actual uptake of those commitments? You know, what are you actually doing? So I wanted to know what you thought of these demonstrative gestures of the solidarity statement. What was your take on these, and how do we ensure that they don't remain demonstrative, that they actually become actionable items? Yeah, Charmaine.
I'm happy. Thank you, Cyrus. I'm happy that you brought that up. I understand the rest of society, and I know I should try not to other them as I'm talking about us being othered, but I understand that the rest of society are suddenly shocked about what they have seen. And I am thankful for the quote unquote allyship that they have opened up to and they're offering. But my problem is that it is just for this moment, you know, and so what you said now, how is this expanding to an everyday occurrence? How is this being opened up that they are realizing that, okay, I am willing to give up and sacrifice certain aspects within my personal life to ensure that other people of color are included. That part I'm not seeing. You know, that part I'm not seeing. So we are a culture of reactionary people where in the moment, yes, it has caused this form of outcry, but then it peters off and we're not doing the work. And I think the charge is on us. The charge is on us that we have to keep reminding them. And all of us use social media. We have to keep reminding them. Don't fall back into the corners where we looking at these cute memes. No, this shit. Sorry, this continues. This continues, and we have to continue to advocate.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm excited about this particular question, and I'm glad that I get a chance to go immediately after your last point, because I too am excited for the for that first step. I think the acknowledgement is powerful. I think that I also acknowledge that there is a woeful ignorance. A lot of larger organizations have known it, have seen it, have done surveys and workshops about anti-Black racism and IBPOC racism, what have you, and all of the above, but the work has not been done. I do think that there is a different shift at this time, however, because of the magnitude and because the universe said, let's shut the world down so you all can see what's going on. But then here's the thing, is that unfortunately, as Charmaine just mentioned, the weight does still sit on us, meaning that people have put out these blanket statements. Folks are hiring more so Black artists, and I say performatively as performers, you know, not necessarily as a performative act, but also that. But still not realizing that more work needs to be done. And there are those who realize that there's more work needs to be done and it's just intentionally performative. And there are those who really don't know and they need our support to understand, no, you need to be doing more work. And so my whole thing is, with that statement on social media, with that hiring more Black artists, with that having an exhibit in the kitchen or in a major gallery, but not being a part of the greater, longer season. Where there's a window, where there's a crack, we need to put roots. And that is our obligation. Unfortunately and fortunately, it's a call for us to say they're still just giving us a crack. So we need to take that initiative and say, no, wait, that's not enough. That is a start, but here I am now at least in the door, in the window, in that crack, so I can now make a statement and make a stance. And that's where it's the responsibility and the onus is on us to say, you can be doing more, you need to be doing more, and then hopefully they do so. Because it is still just a window, unfortunately. We need more writers and directors and producers and people behind the scenes, curators, to inform, not just to be performing.
Yeah, I totally, I agree, Robert. It's about demanding action, continuing to demand action. I had a therapy appointment yesterday, and my therapist told me that the same frustrations are my opportunities for change. And when both Charmaine and Robert are talking about the weight being on our shoulders, to be able to see the kind of future or to manifest the kind of future that we want. I think about how like my phone, my email, my Facebook blew up this summer. Like white people were hitting me up left, right, and center, asking questions, seeking advice. What plays can I read? What YouTube things can I watch? What books should I check out? And I had to shut it all off. I had to like turn my phone off. I had to disconnect from Facebook. And kind of cocoon myself, because as Charmaine was saying, it felt like a reaction to a moment. And this has been a movement, like a collective movement. We've been talking about police brutality my entire life. Like I come from England. There's been police brutality in the UK. Like it's global. And so I often wondered why this particular moment. And I did not watch the George Floyd video. I chose to avoid that. It seemed like that sparked something which seemed strange to me, because there has been so many videos that I can remember in recent memory portraying certain police brutalities. So I'm confused about this. On one hand, it's about demanding action. On the other hand, it's about recognizing that, you know, these organizations were built not necessarily to serve us. And so am I interested in changing them? Am I interested in providing energy, resources toward, you know, helping them turn a new leaf? I don't know. I find this question still very challenging. I find the solidarity statements frustrating, the performative allyship aggravating. You know, Dr. Bettina Love talks about the difference between allyship and co-conspiratorship. And I'm interested in, like, what are people willing to put on the line for me as a Black person? You know, like, if you run an organization, it's not enough to just bring in colored artists. Who's the administration? Like, it's time to step back and give over the power that you have in order for new opportunities and new stories to be told.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Charmaine.
No, that speaks to what I was talking about dismantling the whole system, right? And that is necessary. Will they be willing to? I guess the obvious answer, short answer, would be no. How do we then get our voices heard for them to realize that the structure that is in place, it doesn't matter as much as we fight, it doesn't matter how much we vocalize the inequities that are occurring, unless we look at what is in place and address that this is the structure that needs to be broken up, that needs to be dismantled, to be able to bring in, ushering our voice, ushering indigenous voices, people of all aspects of people of color. I really don't hold on to this acronym BIPOC, IBPOC, whatever, because it just pushes us again into a section of society, you know, and the whole idea of it being open. And so then there is an integrative way, and it may be idealist, but I think 2020 and going forward, we cannot then sit back. So the allyship, as Robert says, that is great. that is great. But we've been Black for all the years that we've been around, you know. So this, sorry, I just have to believe. This shit has been going on for time immortal, right? So it is not time now that we have to cull our way of thinking and change something to make them feel better. No, no. This is the time now where we have to come together, and that is the important part. We have to come together and articulate what it is we want. And so I get your point, Marcel, in terms of, but do I want to deconstruct what they have? But it will be harder, I feel, if we don't. Because if we do parallel existence, then there still will be that fighting and infighting. And we want to ensure that we are not making the mistakes that they have made, that they continue.
What I've seen, you know, certainly since June, and I think, yes, June was this hotbed moment. It's so interesting that we focus a lot on the killing of George Floyd when in Toronto we had the killing of Regis Paquette, and how little attention was given to her, in part because she was a woman, in part because she was Canadian, and how those stories aren't told in the same way as the focus on Black racism in the States. And of course, as we know, you know, there was a lot that was written at that time, and people were saying it's time for Black and Indigenous leadership in these organizations. It's time for structural change. We don't want these demonstrative things. We want structural change. So I want us to shift a little bit because, of course, as we've been talking about, we can spend quite a bit of time addressing white supremacy in the arts, trying to tear down what isn't working and trying to imagine a rebuild. But I also think this is a moment, as we're starting to move on from these panelists, this is a moment also for dreaming and building our own new world, building our own teachers, building our own artistic milieus, ones that will perhaps outlive these institutions that are perhaps dinosaurs. You know, how do we sort of shift our focus into building up our own things? And so what I'm wondering about is, what are you dreaming about right now? What are you planning for when you're imagining Black arts in Canada thriving? What is it that you're sort of imagining and hoping for? And I'm also very interested in this, just this idea of what it is that you would hope to build up in its place. What is it that you're dreaming and imagining right now? I'm also very interested in this idea. One of the myths perpetuated by white supremacy is that there are not that many of us in Canada making art. You know, this idea that Black arts is always already a newcomer to the scene, always already an addition to the existing status quo, rather than recognizing that we've been doing art for generations. So we know that this is not true. I'm very interested, in addition to thinking through Black arts in Canada, I'm interested in who are the artists that you're really excited about? Who are you loving right now? Whose art and movement and creation is inspiring you as we start to build this this world that is celebrating our practice? So what are you excited about? In addition to sort of tearing down, what are we building up, and who are you excited about? Robert?
So to answer the first part of that question, you know, I wrote down as you were talking, shifting culture. And it's something that I kind of talked about a little bit in my little introduction, is that there's about 100 to 150 year erasure of Black Canadian or Canadian history, period, which is a big part that involves Black Canadians. That's from around the time that Canada officially abolished slavery, which was initiated by Britain in 1833, but those in court systems that had started maybe 30 years prior to that, to the Underground Railroad, to immigration acts in the 50s and 60s. So that 150 years from like 1800 to 1950 is gone. And so how do we then exist on a foundation that is not talked about? That's why we talk about segregation and colonialism and racism and slavery in terms of American context, because we don't acknowledge it in Canada. And so how do we exist when there is no foundation? And so a large part of what happens in terms of Black culture, Black history, Black arts in Canada is it only goes back, we're in 2020 now, so it only goes back 70 years. You know, and so with that, then we're talking predominantly about Caribbean, African, and some South American Black experience in Canada, which is great, but is not the entirety of the history of the foundation of Black bodies on this land. So how do we then, so my dream is to see that history told, but also, now I've lost my point there. Oh God, what was I trying to say there? To see that history told, because we can't really exist unless we know where we've come from. How do we know where we're going? And then, oh, sorry, it's the shifting of the culture. Because in Caribbean cultures, in African cultures, unfortunately, we are taught that the arts is not a sustainable way of living. And so that mentality still very much exists in Canada because of that. But if we had information about the existence of the arts in Canada prior to, and Black bodies being here prior to, we might be able to shift that knowledge, shift that belief system, right? And so culture shift in terms of educating, but culture shift in terms of informing who is here, that there is possibility in the arts, that we are here, so we don't have the brain drain, so that we don't have a lack of inspiration or even feeling that there's possibility within the arts.
Amazing. I'm going to ask Marcella and Charmaine the same question about what it is you're dreaming and planning for in this dream Black art in Canada. And then let's get into who you're all loving up right now, because I do want to spend some time talking about that. But first, what is your dream? Yeah, Charmaine.
I'm dreaming that we decondition our mind. And that as a society of people of African descent and a society, I'm going to speak specifically to people of African descent right now, that our minds are deconditioned. Because if that does not occur as a society, we will continue to fall into like, a team asked, why are we looking to white? Why do we look to white people to measure our success? Because that's what we've always known. That's what we have been taught. That's what we have seen. So we have been, as the great Bob Marley talks about our mental enslavement of our minds, our mental enslavement. We need to decondition our minds. That is what I am so excited about. This is what I'm hoping that us, the older folks that are in, but the younger ones that are coming up, that they continue to think differently than how we were taught, than how our parents and grandparents were taught. Because that is the only way that we can start to shift this. That is what I'm excited about.
What am I dreaming about? Robert mentioned shifting of the culture, and I was fortunate to take a week-long theater course this summer around shifting theater ecology. And I think shifting ecology goes hand in hand with shifting the culture. As a theater artist, it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I had my first, Black director, teacher, mentor. I think we need to shift the content that gets taught, and I think we need to shift who is teaching that content. Walter Borden, a mentor of mine, spoke about having a Black national theater. I think about, America having HBCUs, and I'm like, what if we had a Black, historically Black college or university up in Saskatchewan or out in Nova Scotia? Like, it doesn't need to be in Toronto, because Black people are all over this country. So like, why not put it somewhere else? And I think about, tech and how how the tech world can intersect with art, and wanting to see more Black artists get involved with tech, specifically theater. Finding ways to bring more digital into the real life theater work that they make. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, I thank you all so much for your dreams, and may they come to fruition, right? May it be, may it be. And of course, as we say, you know, we are trying right now, what I'm hoping that we can do with this line of questioning is actually to, in real time, stop the continued erasure of our practices and to document the magic of what's happening here in our communities. So I'd love for you all to tell us a little bit about who you're loving on right now, whose art, movement, or creation is speaking to you in this moment. And if you're an ally who's listening on the call, maybe you're in an organization that maybe put out one of those statements. Now is the time to get out your pencil and paper and start jotting down these names, start jotting down these resources, because these are folks who you could be engaging with to do some of that leadership work, that structural change that could help make magic happen. So whose art and movement and creation is making you super excited and jazzed right now? How do we, let's interrupt this erasure. Let's reinsert some of these names into this conversation right now.
I would say, in this whole moment where we've been on pause, I have, I was in and out in terms like Marcel with George Floyd, but because it kept being an onslaught of my psyche, then I started investigating crime. Now, anyone knows me or have seen me then, Crump is further away from my expression, right? Really far. But I think it's because of the angst and what is guttural and deep down that comes up as an expression that speaks to me at this point, that speaks to where my mind is and where sometimes I may not be able to articulate what I want to say or the best way I should say it. Societally, crump right now speaks to me. I am over the past week and a half, there's this idea of working with who was a former student of mine, but he's such a beautiful mover, and actually going to study with him. So I'm flipping the script totally, because I know that there's something that I need to say, and I don't perform anymore. I would choreograph, but at this point I need to be able to speak, but I need to be able to speak from that language. So from I have been drawn from right now. So not one specific artist, but that way of speaking physically at this point.
Amazing. Robert or Marcel?
Yeah. Some of the people that have been inspiring me for a while, but certainly more so over this time, Michaela Cole. I believe she's just absolutely brilliant as an actor, as a writer. If you have the opportunity to look up some of her interviews, she talks very candidly about how she was not a writer, how she basically just kind of threw herself in and just started jotting down ideas, and how her craft has developed because of that. Likewise, Issa Rae, in the same vein, people who have basically just built, they didn't see themselves, and so they wrote it for themselves, they created it for themselves. They write, produce, direct, and act in their own work now, and they're becoming, I'm using the word brand with trepidation, but they're becoming they're conglomerates. They're becoming their own entities and forces, which I absolutely find powerful. Jeremy O. Harris, those who might not be familiar with him, he wrote Slave Play, which I got a chance to see on Broadway. And it is one of the most incredible pieces of work I've ever seen in theater. It is challenging, it is thoughtful, it is, and I doubt that Canada will be forward enough to bring that work here, but I would so love to see a theater company bring that work here and to see that show have life beyond Broadway. I'm also not going to continue too long, but I'm also really inspired by a lot of what I see on Netflix from South Africa, partly because I love to see how their culture is so infused in what they do. So a lot of what we see in film and TV and in media is so westernized that unique nuances and culture and dialects and all of the above get lost. And Canada has that as a melting pot. So, you know, I love artists like Cardinal, who throws in a little bit of the patois or the reggae or the Caribbean influence into his hip hop. So I would love to see Canadian theater, Canadian film and TV bring some of that into the art that is reflected, because it's such a big part of culture, but it's not really reflected in what we're seeing.
Lydia Collins, who's a writer, poet out of Ottawa. I think they had a book of poetry that came out earlier this year. To everyone we've ever been, worth checking out. Chance Matuku out here in St. Catharines, who is the creative director of like a marketing brand studio, who's turned his artistry into helping other artists develop their brands, develop their platforms. Rachel Mutombo, a playwright from Montreal, who, 10 years from now, I hope, and another dream is to see Rachel Mutombo's plays being performed across this country. And a shout out to Mumbi Tendebwa Otu, who's the artistic director of Obsidian Theater, and is a leader, a visionary, just a staple in the Black arts community. And anything Mumbi does, people should run to and try and check out.
Thank you all so much for dropping those offerings. And I want to point people also to the chat. There's been a real flourishing of activity in the chat as people list names. Raven Wings here, Jazz Fairy J, Essie Mensa, Janet Sears, so many incredible folks. So keep putting them in the chat. This is how we do it in real time. This is how we interrupt the erasure. This is how we interrupt that mythology through white supremacy that says that Black artists are always newcomers, that are always new additions to the scene. Instead, we're saying, hey, actually, we've been here. This is our practice. This is our work. Also really upsetting this trend that whenever we talk about Black artists in this country, we talk about American artists. We don't talk about Black Canadian artists. So thank you all for offering, from St. Catharines to Regina to Iqaluit, Black artists who are doing this incredible work, and keep it coming in the chat, because this can provide a resource as we start to try to figure out how to action some of this, instilling Black leadership into these organizations. These are some of the folks who can help us to do it. I'd love for us to talk very briefly about funding. Because, of course, as we know, funding is part of this conversation. How do we ensure that Black arts are supported in Canada to flourish and thrive? So what do you think needs to happen in terms of funding to ensure that we have what we need, both at the level of individual artists, but also for those of us who are in collectives or burgeoning arts organizations? What is it that you think we need right now in terms of funding to fund this revolution, I'll call it?
May I go?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think Canada is great in terms of its way of all of its granting bodies, its funding resources. I think there's certainly more work to do to diversify how that money goes out. There's been a lot of entities that have now promised money to specifically Black communities as well as IBPOC communities moving forward with the current movement. But I want to go back to the shifting of culture as it pertains to funding, because I think that I really have apprehension about relying on grants and government funding for creating art. So I went to see friends perform at a HIV/AIDS fundraiser a couple of years ago at the CBC building. And it was predominantly all Black performers that day. It was a free event. And I don't know how many people that theater holds, maybe around 500 people. And there were maybe 30 people there, all white except for, I believe, one Indigenous trans person, an Asian man, and then I later found out my friend who was choreographing one of the performers was at the back of the theater who just didn't feel comfortable sitting in the space. And then I thought to myself, and I don't know how many people know this stat, but 1 in 2 Black gay men will live with HIV in their lifetime. That's 2019 statistic. That's more than 30 years after the epidemic. And this is a free event, fundraising for HIV/AIDS, and nobody's in the audience. And so I say that because with the funding bodies, with the funding and granting, what happens is that people now have this money, and the onus and the responsibility of doing grassroots work and outreach to get people into the space and into the seats to see it is not done. But when there's an expectation that I don't make money unless there are people in the seats, then there's a greater need to reach the grassroots. But part of the problem, as we know in Black communities, is unfortunately there's not always the support. But it's not because people don't desire the support, it's because sometimes their money is not there. It's because sometimes, like I said, shifting culture and mentalities that you're gonna see yourself, first of all, on stage, you're gonna be able to find something that you connect to and relate to. And then also arts is not such a taboo. And so that's kind of the way I feel about in terms of funding and supporting Black arts is yes, the support of government agencies and funding bodies, but how do we grassroots fund? How do we as a community support one another and each other and also bridge both of those streams?
Charmaine or Marcel? Yeah, Charmaine.
I don't have a great answer for this. I love the question, Robert, and it comes back for our community in terms of seeing the importance of being there to support the work that we present. You know, I think that, and I hope this does not come over as negative in terms of commercial aspects of arts, like the celebrities. So our people will flock to go and see something that Beyonce does or Jay-Z or whatever. That's fine. There is a space for that. But if we are trying to make a dent in what is being shown and what is not being shown, and realizing that we are not really present in the more established theaters. And so how can we reframe our way of thinking to see the importance that the work that we do, the work that we do that address things, as you say, you will see yourself on stage. Are you willing to be open and vulnerable to allow yourself to be present, to allow yourself to journey? Because the healing has to start. And we are, and I'm not saying this, touting this from a mountain, but all artists are a form of healing or healers. And so, but then they need to come, they need to be present. They need to be present to be able to see that. The funding makeup, I guess it comes back down to what we see as, or what is deemed as excellence. What is deemed as excellence, what is seen, what is the exemplar of excellence. And then we as Black people need to see us and be willing to support us and be willing to say, well, no, you know, the National Ballet, they have their following. I don't need to put my dollars into that. I need to put my dollars into Robert's. I need to put my dollars into Pepin, and so on and so forth, right? So it comes back to this the conditioning of our mind. So for me, that is how we can shift the funding or start shifting from that aspect.
I'm seeing a lot of people resonating with that in the chat, and the chat is very active. People talking about how to support ourselves and how to fund ourselves. Marcel, what are your thoughts?
Accessibility is a thought that I have around shifting the application process for getting grants, and also opening up these organizations and hiring more people of color on the administrative, executive level, to assist in shifting the way that they go about offering their grants, designing their applications. I think video submissions should be a acceptable form. Audio submission, audio recording should be an acceptable form. Yeah, but listening to Robert, like, I also agree, fuck the funding model, like, fuck the grants too, like, becoming beholden to this organization that is giving, a handout. Yeah, I don't know, there's something icky about it, truthfully.
Robert?
If I just may add, we talk a lot about having people behind the scenes on boards, in those rooms and in those spaces. I want people to understand that it's not just about having a present person of color there. It's because we have the cultural understanding. It's because we communicate in a certain way. It's because we understand certain experiences. And so when I look at somebody's application, for example, or somebody's audition, or somebody interviewing for position, I might pick up on something you don't. Whether it be nonverbal communication, whether it be their experience, their history, and understand how they come to that space. And so it's not just about having a physical body there that looks different or looks a certain way. It's about the way we communicate, the way we relate. And I wanted to bring this up too, because when you talk about the chat and how we relay, a lot of how Black bodies have communicated historically, no matter where in this world we come from, there's such a powerful lineage in terms of what gets passed down. And it's not formal in a Western sense. And so a lot gets miscommunicated, a lot gets missed. And so a lot of it, what we're talking about is being in those pieces, being in those rooms, is so that we can start to shift how that is seen and how we communicate and how we interact through space, how we create art.
I'd love for us to thank you all so much for that, and I love seeing the comments in the chat. This is such an active group, and I love this. I hope we can save this chat because there's so much gold in there for people to draw on. I would love, as we start to, I know we're getting close to 12, but I'd love for us to talk a little bit about how do we keep this work intersectional. So thinking through this process, we are necessarily talking about the intersections. Kevin and I talk a lot about this idea of communities, that we're never ever thinking about our experience of Blackness as a monolithic experience, but rather one that is informed by our experience of being queer or trans or deaf or mad or disabled or migrant or Muslim or whatever, So how do we do this work of presencing ourselves, of combating erasure, of addressing and supporting Black arts in this country, of ensuring that we have the funding, but doing it in an intersectional way? What are the strategies that you think that we should be doing to ensure that we don't lose some of the nuances of our differences?
even if you don't have a platform, I think it's important to be. And so I'd like to call into the space Jackie Shane, Billy Newton Davis. And I say them because they are LGBTQ plus trailblazers in Canada whose unfortunately they don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so, you know, whenever I have the opportunity, whether it be a space like this or just at a conversation with a person at a bar, I bring up people like that. I bring up these stories. And so I think that's an important part of it. And then also, like, you know, what I was saying in terms of the grassroots outreaching, but then also, you know, there are things that are not ours. We embody them because of colonialism. We embody them because of ancestral trauma, but they're not ours. Shadism is not ours. Sexism is not ours. Homophobia is not ours. All of those things are not ours. And so we have to start to unpack that as communities, so that we can heal from it, understand that it doesn't belong to us, and stop infighting, as Charmaine mentioned earlier. And part of how we do that is also acknowledging, yes, we go by these acronyms of LGBTQ+, yes, we go by these acronyms of IBPOC, but when we can speak specifically to Black communities, and yes, all of broaching the entire acronym is great, but there are times where we need to speak specifically to the Black community, to the Black LGBT+ community, to the Black community about all of these different things. And so I think that's a way of working towards that intersectionality.
It's about healing. It's about healing. Nothing else to add to that. That's how we can get into intersectionality.
Yeah, so the idea that, you know, one of the things that we're healing from, I think, largely is the way that these systems of violence and oppression have been forced onto our communities and adopted in particular ways, so much so that it isn't always safe for that Black trans disabled artist to be out as themselves. And so thank you both for that. Marcel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just empathy, or not just empathy, but to add the word empathy, and thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of another person's experience, removing the I for a moment, or for many moments, and just thinking about, like, what would it be if someone else was in my position right now? I think we lack a lot of empathy. And I think that sometimes intersections can be quite harmful and violent and toxic if there isn't empathy kind of holding it together. So yeah, I would say empathy.
Mm-hmm. I love this conversation, and I'm so thankful to all of you for everything that you've shared. We've gone on this journey today of, first of all, looking at what the experience of erasure actually is, you know, what is happening in this current moment, such that Black artists are still finding themselves in 2020, folks, still shut out largely of mainstream organizing. We talked about creating our own things from the ground up and building and supporting our own communities and creating our own networks that somehow grow their own beautiful garden while we're still trying to tear down the mess of the institutions that are rooted in white supremacy. We've talked a little bit about the kinds of things that we'd love to see happen in Black arts in this part of the world. And we've talked about some of the artists who are really exciting us and making us feel hopeful and feel engaged in this beautiful, rich set of communities that we're part of that are nurturing in the arts. And lastly, we've been talking about both how we're going to fund and support each other's work, but how we're going to make sure that we keep this work intersectional. I hope that you know, this has inspired and sparked some questions. I'd love for us to turn to the chat, and if anybody has any questions for the panelists, now would be a time you can drop them in the chat. We can figure out ways to do this, but I would love to open it up and turn it to you to see if there are any particular questions to kind of continue this conversation. We are going to be going, we have a little bit more time just before we go into the breakouts So I wanted to see if there are any questions that folks have, and we can just put them in the chat. So we have one question here coming from Bushra, which is, who were some of your mentors and influences? So for you folks, who were some of your mentors and influences? Also, I'd love to know if you found mentors or if you have had mentors in your life. Not everybody does, but yeah, who were some of your mentors and influences?
I wouldn't say that I had mentors in my life. Yeah, the influence that brought me where I am was having come to Canada and realizing that our voice within the dance sector was not heard. That was my, we were not recognized, and there was not space within the professional arena for our voice. That was my.
I also struggle with, whether I had mentors or not. I'm envious of people who, especially in the arts, formally had really supportive arts mentors or examples. I did have a teacher in high school who took Claudette Millett Grant. She was not one of the arts teachers. I went to the arts program, but she was not one of the arts teachers, but she took an interest in me. And so I'm really grateful for her. She was the one who first started telling me about grants, and I was like, and bursaries and all of that other stuff. And then also a friend of mine who was a published poet, now works in the medical field, Jeffrey Evans, who really took me under his wing and afforded me a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think about Philip Aiken, Audrey Zena Mandiela, as artistic mentors. Family-wise, or I guess non-artistic wise, I think about my grandfather, who was part of a bus boycott in Bristol, England, the city that I was born in, during the late 60s. And just like sitting with him and listening to him talk about his life, his journey, fills me with strength and pride and like a resiliency and a tenacity and an understanding that like I'm part of a breath of time. And as I continue moving forward, I'm carrying him with me. And yeah, so I think about him a lot when I think about that idea of mentorship or influence.
Thank you all so much. And I've been thinking a lot about, so we did a workshop through the Wild Seed Black Arts Fellowship with Jazz Fairy J. And in one of the sessions, she invited us to call our ancestors into the room with us, and this idea of being part of a lineage that is bigger than ourselves, that is part of something longer, a trajectory that stretches generations past, but also potentially generations into the future, that we are the ancestors of our great-great-grandchildren. There's a question in the chat here about how we ensure we're carrying on the legacy of our ancestors and our lineage. So Emily has asked, how do you carry on the beautiful legacy of your family or ancestors or lineage?
Well, for me, I grew up hearing about my great-great-great-grandfather who came through the Underground Railroad. I did not know until maybe my 20s that his son, my great-great-grandfather, and his wife were the Ball Family Jubilee Singers. I knew there was a legacy of music. My grandfather sang. I later found out that my great-grandfather was the choir director and his wife was a soloist. They all played instruments, and as I said, they traveled around Canada. There's not a day that I have an opportunity to sing or perform that I don't think about them, that I don't carry them with me. Maya Angelou said, we come as one but stand as 10,000. And I live by that in my life and in my artistic practice. But in practical ways, like I said earlier, if it's just sitting at a bar communicating it with somebody, if it's when I have an opportunity to speak after a performance, I acknowledge them, I bring them up in rooms like this, I talk about them, because one, it's informing, and it's Canadian history, it's my legacy, but it's also Canadian legacy, and I'm really passionate about that, and I'm fortunate to be connected to that. And then also, you know, for me, I used to say that I was the first person in my family to pursue the arts professionally until I acknowledged the fact that my ancestors had been doing it. But again, it's because it hadn't been relayed to me in that regard. But now my younger brother is an animator illustrator. My eldest nephew is an animator illustrator. My niece sings. My other niece is an animator. My nephews are in art school. And I believe in that spiritual shift. And so me making that effort and carry on that legacy and created something to create an opportunity and an example in person, but also universally and spiritually, to allow that next generation to be able to step into their truth and into their gifts and into their hopefully prosperity.
Thank you so much. Do either of the rest of you want to, yeah, Charmaine.
My spiritual life is connected to my ancestors. I am a traditional African spiritualist. I follow IFA, which is West African Yoruba tradition. So I have to, it's for my existence, I must acknowledge my ancestors, right? And although I came into the practice later on in life, wherein those that are born on the continent, they come into it from day one, right? But bringing it back to this world and noticing, so when I think about my life, like I was born in Trinidad, grew up in Barbados, then I came. My immediate family, there's a combination of visual artists, musicians, and myself that are into the arts. Between the arts and teaching, that has been our legacy. Whether the arts were seen as a viable profession, that's a whole different, that's a cultural conversation that needs to be unpacked. But I think in the work that I have started, which has ushered me in, so my dance ushered me into my spirituality, which has ushered me to this position where the work that I do has always been some form of advocacy for us and advocacy for our people. And that I attribute to my ancestors. Like I cannot separate. You know, I see Samson here just below me, and Samson can speak to what that is to go through an initiation and to find out what your destiny is, because we don't have that in the West per se, right? And sometimes then there's this weight because they tell you these things that you're supposed to do, not really telling you how to achieve them, but they tell you these things that you're supposed to. Interestingly enough, things kind of fall in place as we continue, right? And also in the West, like I don't know with Samson's journey, but I find in IFA, there are not many practices here. So I don't really have, unless I call my Baba in Nigeria. So I have to work on a day-to-day basis, and it happens naturally and it happens organically. But I know that my ancestors, who are to my back, who are underneath, who are above me, allow me to continue the work that I necessarily have.
Thank you. Marcel.
This was great to hear because I think I'm still developing and learning how to honor the legacy of my ancestors. I think my ancestral healing work has been quite recent in my life. I've felt very disconnected, from Jamaica, from the past 3 generations. But what I'm learning in some of the research I'm doing for plays I'm currently writing and developing is just a deep appreciation for the journey, for the sense of running, for how much footwork, movements, how many feet have touched the soil in so many different lands. And similar to Robert, I try as much as I can to bring up family, to talk about England in relation to what's going on here, to speak about the Windrush generation and the amount of people from the Caribbean that came to the UK to rebuild the UK, and then we're told you don't get citizenship in the UK, and how that kind of cycle shows itself in various ways in different countries. So I'm still learning how to honor the legacy, but I think every day is a step forward in doing that.
Thank you so much. There's some great folks really resonating with what you're saying and this journey of finding that path. You're getting a lot of love and support, Marcel, in the chat on that. And also folks are drawing attention to the amazing Zong Global 2020 that, of course, M. Nabrasi Phillip is broadcasting. Today is the last live stream of a 10-day series of readings of this book, of this project that is an ancestral ceremony commemorating those lost on the spaceship Zong. So you can check that out. There's information there in the chat. And a big shout out to Samson. I saw you there for a minute, and for all of the folks who are doing this work of ensuring and thinking through our ancestors are all around us right now. They're listening in on this conversation. They're probably laughing and enjoying us being together and sharing this space. And so I'm very thankful to be sharing this space with you and with all of your ancestors. We are, of course, also ancestors for the next generation. We are the ancestors that are becoming. And I would love for us, as we sort of start to wrap for the day, Diane painted this beautiful picture for us of a future in, and I'm going to get the date wrong, but it was something like 2151 or 2050. It was sometime in the near but yet distant future. And I would love to know, in your ideal imagining of 2050 here on this north part of Turtle Island and Inuit Nunavut, what do Black arts look like in 2050? What is your hope for the future? What are our great grandchildren going to be getting to do as artists in 2050? We only have a couple of minutes, so I'll just offer this creative question to each of you. What are you hoping for 2050 for Black arts in Canada? Let's return to this time that Diane offered us in the beginning, this potential of a futurity where we've survived and thrived, where we have made it. What does it look like?
I would say that in 30 years, 2050 from now, that there is an opening and a receptiveness of cultures, and that black arts are seen parallel to where the established organizations are seeing right now. I know there is so much richness that can come, and with the ushering in of Black arts and the elevation of Black arts, we would have started. So that is my where I see it.
Beautiful.
To be healed, we need to be healed. Yeah.
Beautiful.
That thought actually made me really emotional. Positively so, because I think for the first time I really feel hope for my nieces and nephews, for my great nieces and nephews. My eldest nephew just had a daughter. You know, I think about the Eatons in Canada. I think about the Rockefellers. I think about contemporary, the Kardashians. I wonder a lot why, and this is not in any kind of egocentric kind of way, but why my family didn't have that. And so for the first time, when I think about, you know, 30 years from now, I see the possibility for that. You know, again, not about the fame or the money, but the possibility for sustainability, the possibility for opportunities, the possibility for growth, the possibility for them to be involved in the arts and to be sustainable arts workers. Like, that's really, really exciting for me.
I immediately thought about Elon Musk, his SpaceX company, hiring Black designers to develop spacesuits and getting Black people on Mars in 2050, and seeing like what kind of murals, what kind of artwork we can get put up there. Yeah, that's immediately what I thought about. I just thought about us, how dope we could make spacesuits look, the helmets, the ships. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I love it. We're on some next level Octavia Butler, Take Me Amongst the Stars kind of vibe.
Yes.
Love it. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you for this conversation. Marcel, Stuart, Charmaine, Headley, and Robert Ball, thank you so much for taking us on this journey. We've moved from, we have a problem, there is this extreme experience of erasure that we're all feeling, and we've gone on a journey now where we are in space, where we are literally our ancestors' wildest dreams, where we are making a future for our next generations to be able to thrive in ways that we perhaps are still struggling to do now. We've gone on a whole journey from the past to the present in this session, and I look forward to seeing where you all take this in the breakout rooms. I want to say a huge, again, shout out and thank you to all of the panelists today. There